You cannot get to success without some form of failure. Now, we have to keep it in business context. There is a bottom line for all of the companies that we've worked for. And,
Yeah.
it's not like every failure is acceptable.
Hello and welcome to the Leadership Launchpad. Today's discussion, though we scheduled it several weeks ago, it's actually really timely. So I'm extremely excited for our guest today, Andrea Wanerstrand. Let me start by telling you a little bit about her, and then I'll tell you why I am so excited for this discussion. Andrea is a seasoned leadership strategist, executive coach, and founder of A3 Culture Lab with over 25 years of experience and inside global giants like Microsoft, Meta, T-Mobile, and Hitachi. She helps leaders shift from burnout to bold influence through her Mindset Maven method and A3 philosophy, which stands for authentic, autonomous, and accountable. She blends neuroscience, behavioral strategy, and business insight to drive powerful cultural change, enabling organizations to build high-performing, human-centric workplaces where people truly thrive. Over the past few weeks, I've been reflecting a lot on the kinds of companies that I tend to work with, and there are some of them that are really struggling in these ever-changing times, and there are others that are really thriving. And so last week, I actually sat down and spent a lot of time thinking through what makes the difference between these two organizations. What are some of the commonalities between them? And Andrea has been on the inside of one of those transformations. She spent a number of years at Microsoft, and over the last couple decades, Microsoft really went full circle from being a company that was an industry leader to a company that was struggling to now a company that is an industry leader again. And she saw that from the inside, so we're definitely going to be talking about that. We're also going to dive a bit into her A3 methodology to understand how every leader can use it to help their team's performance. Before we get into the discussion, I do want to remind you that if this is your first time listening to the show, make sure you subscribe so that you never miss a future episode. And if you're already subscribed and you know someone else who you think might benefit from this conversation, I humbly ask that you share it with them because that is how we grow. So with that, let's get into the discussion. Andrea, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Matt. It's wonderful to be here. I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Yeah, I'm really excited for it. I know I talked a lot about your background, but there is one thing that I want to bring up as we get started. So on LinkedIn, you describe yourself as a few different things. You describe yourself as a coach, a speaker, and an author. I get all that. I think anybody's going to understand that. But then you also say you are a lavender farm owner. What's that like? How'd you own a lavender farm?
Lived in the city here in Seattle for about 22 years, and we were looking to make that change. Our son had graduated from college, and so we were looking at properties on the various islands outside of Seattle here on the Salish Sea in Puget Sound. And the last house we visited on one of our tours on an island called Maury Island, which is part of Vashon here, it was a working pig farm. And we were like, okay, let's just go take a look. And we walked the property and it felt like home. And we're like, okay, what would we do with all the land? We really hadn't been searching for a property to have a lavender farm on. The pigs were going away. We were not going to be pig farmers.
Okay.
And so we kind of looked at, I've been doing a lot of biohacking because I did hit burnout in 2017 to the point where I got hospitalized. So I work with a lot of different types of professionals in the biohacking industry and medical industry to understand insomnia and how we manage our nervous system. And I was like, I love lavender oil. It's really good for the environment, really good for the bees. So we started learning everything about lavender, and we now have over 1,000 plants here on our farm, and that'll be doubling in the next year. Each plant is about, when it gets to full maturity, about 4 feet round. So it's like huge hedges of lavenders with
Yeah.
hundreds of thousands of bees in the summertime. And long story short, I also got the opportunity to buy a tractor, learn to drive a tractor, which is kind of fun. You've
I
you've
bet.
you've I piloted, I guess, because you don't necessarily, well, I guess
Yeah.
you drive a plane, but
Yeah.
a big piece of equipment, it's a lot of fun. So when they see little 5'3" me on the stage and I say, "Yeah, and I also own a lavender farm and I drive a tractor for my other part of my farm," folks are like, "Huh?" But, it's really connected us to nature, and it's really just been a good grounding force, and I get my
Yeah.
lavender oil free these days.
That's incredible. Yeah, I think especially for those of us that work a lot in the technology industry, it grounding is the right word. It can be really great to kind of get out and have those experiences. That's incredible. So do you sell it then too? It sounds like.
Yeah, we actually
Yeah.
distill the oil here. It's very, any engineer that's listening to you would like it. It's a still that we got out of a great company out of the Ukraine. It's very chitty chitty bang bang. If ever any of your viewers know that old movie, but it is a lot of fun and a lot of science, and it
Yeah.
feeds my science side as well as my biohacking side.
Yeah, that sounds like a very kind of full circle experience. That's great. Well, let's dive in with the story of Microsoft,
Mhm.
because when we chatted a few weeks ago, you had said, you saw, like I mentioned in the introduction, kind of the inside journey of that company. And one of the things that I think is interesting is, when we talk about technology companies, whether they succeed or fail, so often the story is about the technology itself and the things that they're doing or not doing or the sales. But all of that is downstream from the culture, the leadership decisions. What are some of the things I think most people are probably aware of kind of that change that happened within Microsoft, but from inside, like what role did leadership and culture play in them going through that cycle?
Mm. Well, it was a complete mindset shift, and that determined the culture. What I mean by that is when I started, Bill Gates was still CEO, and it was a very prosperous time for Microsoft in the early aughts of the 2000s. And yet we were starting to get to the point where, the iPhone was getting ready to come out, right? So
Yep.
everybody's got to like put your place in time. This is pre-iPhone, and everyone didn't have a handheld computer yet that way because the
It's
original
crazy.
the original
Crazy to think.
mission of Microsoft was to have a computer on every desktop. Now we have a computer in every palm, right? So Bill left, Steve Ballmer came in, very similar leadership approach and methodology. It was really about getting things done. Sales processes were taking orders. We were the leading, you know, company in our space. So it was not about solution selling at that point. The cloud
Mm,
hadn't come yet to be what it is today. Internet was just coming, it was there, but it wasn't there. So you have to put the place and time with what the tools were and what it was. But as Satya Nadella was coming into leadership and he was coming from Azure and the waves of technology that would be coming were very much top of mind. He knew that our current mindset of a bit of arrogance, he used to say, we need to move from a know it all to a learn it all culture because we were breaking on the dawn of this new era of technology explosion, even coming to what we have today with AI. And so he could have done it inside out, but he brought outside in with Carol Dweck, the growth mindset. And this is all about curiosity. It's not about arrogance. It's not about knowing it all and being the expert, which in a technical company, a lot of folks take pride in their technical expertise.
yeah.
So it was a bit of a shift. Also, how do you lead through that? Emotional intelligence back in 2010 wasn't really talked about, 2011, 2012, when this shift was starting to occur. So it required not only systems thinking of how are we going to lean into the new tech, how are we going to become solution sellers rather than transactional sellers, like how many office packages are you going to order? But we were leaning more into that solution selling space, and the Internet of Things was coming into being, like the idea of extended technology, and having things and devices that are wearables. So we had to start thinking more creative and more innovative, and that meant listening to our customers differently. And so the idea of a growth mindset is that every failure is a learning opportunity, and from that learning opportunity, you will get to success. You cannot get to success without some form of failure. Now we have to keep it in business context. There is a bottom line for all of the companies that we've worked for. And,
Yeah.
it's not like every failure is acceptable. That said, it's this kind of rebound resilience type mindset that was the lead shift in the culture. And it required a different type of leadership in order to go from transactional to really solutions.
I'd be really interested to know because as you said, I think you're spot on. And what I've seen is that technical companies, technical leaders, that having the answer is so prized. It's a really big shift to make. What were some of when you say new leadership was required, how did that manifest itself? Was it just Satya Nadella, like, because the CEO can say a lot of things, but there's a lot of stuff that trickles down from that. What were some of the things that Microsoft used to help actively change that culture over time?
Yeah, it was the start of the concept of a coaching culture, manager as
Okay.
coach. And I'm not talking the sports coach yelling on the sidelines, although
Mm,
great sports coaches are included here. But it's this idea of curiosity, the idea of being coach-like as part of your everyday presence rather than you telling. It's not a command and control. It's building autonomy so you can scale.
hmm.
Microsoft is 250,000 people today for employee base. At the time, we're looking at half that population, right?
Hmm.
And so even with the global presence that they have today, you're still doing more with less in order to scale. That's always an objective, especially for public traded companies.
Hmm.
So if you're moving and your customer base is looking at your competition and it's not just about taking orders anymore, how do you create a sales force? How do you create a product development workforce that is able to look at the next great thing, not just be the great thing? And
Yeah.
so hiring processes, management expectations came in. The idea of model coach care, those are the manager expectations at Microsoft.
Mm.
Walk the talk, coach your team, and care. And people struggled around care. And it's like, do I have to throw a party? Do I have to do anything? And it was, no, you simply have to treat them as human. And this is where more of the human centricity comes in. You don't even have to like them at the end of the day, is what the chief marketing officer said at the time. Although you'd hope that you would, right? But you have to be kind, which means being
Yeah.
courageous and saying the hard thing, but in a respectful, constructive way. And
Yeah.
so, this humanness and how do you feel about things, and understanding that we as humans do have feelings in the workplace, and whether we want to or not. Yes, we can be professional, but we're selling to humans, we are humans. So, how does that human centricity come in? Which
Yeah.
in the early 2000s or late in the 1990s, that it was all about just sell, 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 which is not unique to Microsoft. It was a global
Yeah.
phenomenon, right?
Yeah. I think you're touching on exactly one of the hardest points around building new leaders in many ways is that balancing that human centeredness of, what does caring mean? Does that mean I like everybody? How do I connect with them? In our line of work, when I work with companies, I use the word trust a lot,
Hmm.
where you have to build these trusting relationships. I think that's the first role of a manager, is to not just make sure your team trusts you, but that the team members trust each other. And a big part of developing that trust is having some kind of human connection. But especially for people who maybe aren't used to that kind of thinking, or don't want to, they say they don't want to bring themselves to work, finding their unique, or I think using your terms, authentic way to connect with their people can be a real struggle. So for you, when you're working, whether it's the times that what you saw in that change in Microsoft, or now as you're working with organizations, what are some of the ways that you kind of coach leaders to find their authentic way to connect with people, so that it doesn't seem too like formulaic?
Yeah, I think people, when we say you bring your whole self to work, um, people confuse that with their their vulnerable side at all times. And what I mean by that
Mm,
is, the person on a Saturday morning that's really tired and just wants to like have their cup of coffee and hang out with the family or the kids and not do anything, or might have an opinion or might have more emotions shown. So I'm a big fan of Brene Brown when she says there's no oversharing and no nor is there a need for faux crying, right? So it's not about being sharing all your emotions and your vulnerability.
mm,
In order to have trust, people have to understand and your consistency. And so, what I mean by that is when you walk into a room, how do people feel? Are they anxious because you've come there and they're going to, get drilled? Or are they like looking forward to getting clarity? So, when we're authentic, we're just simply showing up as the best selves that we can and understanding some filters might need to be in place. When you're in a point of leadership, everything that you say holds weight, whether you know it or not. Um, Folks are looking to you for how you maneuver, how you navigate. And we are
mhm,
storytellers at heart, so we're going to fill in the blanks. But if you're having a bad day, and it might be on the personal side, no, you don't have to share everything. But you do have to make it clear that any energy that you're bringing in, that you're like, you've got a sour face or anything, it's not
mm,
about the other person.
yeah,
So fake it till you make it doesn't work because your body gives signals. And the FBI and folks have done. There's a lot of science on our microbody signals and the energy
yeah,
that we put out before it ever comes out of our mouth and or even hits our thinking brain. So being authentic is being really intentional in how you want to show up, how you want to make people feel, and doing that in a consistent way so they know what to expect. And then when you're off your game, if you will, letting them know in some way, hey, I'm just having an off day. It's nothing to do with you. In whatever
yeah,
style and communication way that fits you, that's what authentic is being. It's not like they don't have to know every hobby you have or every, trial and tribulation you had as a kid. It's just you showing up with consistency and being human. Because when you're perfect, they don't, and you do fall
I
and
don't
you
buy
will
it.
fail. We all fail at some point.
Yeah,
It's a harder fall and it's harder to get that trust back. People trust
yeah,
folks that are consistent. And the flip side of that, Matt, is if you're consistently um, in an aggressive stance or really drilling people, that's what they remember and feel from you as well. So be intentional. How do you want to be remembered? How do you want to make people feel? And make those choices. And that's being authentic.
yeah. So it's that kind of authentic, that consistent curiosity is really helpful. Finding your own way to do it. What about when, you mentioned before, you don't even have to like these people. You need to connect with them. You need to care about them. But caring doesn't. When let me ask you this way: there are always going to be people on your team where you're just different. You have different interests, you
Mhm.
have different styles, you have different energies. How do you maintain your authenticity while also, I think it's a big job of a leader to kind of adapt their leadership style in many ways to the individual that they're working with.
Absolutely.
And so how do you find that line of being authentic and true to yourself while also realizing that different people will need you to show up in different ways?
It's it's having that interpersonal awareness. If you're dealing with someone who's a introvert, don't publicly proclaim even the good stuff folks might not be comfortable with. Get to know your people on that stance. But
Hmm.
the aspect of being kind and being clear in what you're doing. And it's not about, and when you're kind, it's about the other person. So, how are you going to help them grow? Is their growth going to help the
Mm,
team grow? And how are you going to help them perform at their best? You're doing work as a leader through other people. And so, care about that other individual enough so that you're giving them constructive insight. I see leaders that they try to be liked, and so they're really super nice, but that's all about them. So when we care,
mm,
it's about the other person and it's
I
about
like that.
moving that other person into performing as best as they can in the environment. So you provide them clarity, you provide them timely feedback. You do so in a way that is, how can I help versus you got that wrong. So
Yeah.
are you trying to build them up or you're trying to take them down? And if your intent is to take them down, I would say you're not caring at all about that other human. But if you're trying to build them up in a constructive, honest way, that is care.
I really like that. I think it's a really clear way that before any interaction, before you write an email, before you get ready for a one-on-one, as you're planning out what you're going to say, it's just kind of doing a quick check to think through: are they the center of this, or am I the center of this? Am I doing this because of something about me, or am I doing this to the betterment of them? And just to add on to that, I do think couple things that you've mentioned a few times that I want to kind of foot stomp on, of how, because everything we do gets filtered through kind of our view of the world.
Hmm.
Like, if you don't like somebody, or to put it a different way, if you already have decided that somebody's bad for your team, that they're not going to be a performer, you just got in your brain like they're not going to succeed here, you're never going to be able to give them good, like, feedback that's successful. Like, you're just not, you have to get into a mindset, as you say, of you want the best for this person. What is going to make them improve? What is going to build them up? And because if you don't have that as the centerpiece, then kind of no matter what language you say or what you try to do with your body, it's always going to get filtered through that lens, and they're going to know it. And so taking a little bit of time to just reflect back on that, to make sure you're ready for this email, to make sure you're ready for this conversation, I think goes a long way to make sure all the other elements, the nonverbal elements, kind of fall into line. If I kind of ramble there, does that make any sense?
No, it totally makes sense. And I think some people would get confused when I say, like, how do you want to make them feel? Well, I don't want them to feel bad. I want them to feel good. Great. But they still might feel bad because you're going to have to tell them something that's hard to hear. That's going to be
Mm,
something that they need to change. But if you don't diminish them as humans and let them know, when I say build them up, hey, I believe in you. I believe we can get there. Or even if you didn't believe in them, I believe there's another path for you. And how do you help
mm,
them on that path? Right.
yes.
It's not about building them up and making them feel all good and warm and fuzzy.
Yeah.
The kind leader has to be really courageous.
Yeah.
And the folks that stay with, I'm going to make them feel warm and fuzzy and I'm going to be really nice and they're really going to like me, but they're still not meeting expectations and I'm going to have to do something hard. They're avoiding. I
Hmm.
think you've talked about that when we talk about, like, staying in our technical expertise or, staying in our comfort zone. And we can't avoid when we really care, when we're really being authentic, we step in and we say the hard thing, but in a way that is going to help move things forward.
Yeah, I since I come from more of a like a hardware engineering background with this kind of conversation, I always think of it like a relief valve.
Hmm.
Because to as you say, like the pressure comes out eventually, right? like they're gonna find if somebody's not performing, they're gonna find out. The question is, do they find out the first time they don't perform and you just have a little side conversation, or the fifth time they don't perform and now you're talking about termination? Like the truth comes out eventually. And so as leaders, we need to make sure that relief valve is set pretty low so that we get through that friction, deliver the clear feedback, so that the pressure doesn't build up and then get let out in kind of a mass explosion. That whole discussion really does tie well into another one of your A's, accountability. Another one of those, and I want to talk about kind of autonomous and accountable kind of together, because outside of trust, another thing I talk a lot about is clarity, and namely, really in setting clear expectations. Because when I talk to engineers, the number one problem they always talk about when you first become an engineer is delegation. You spend your entire career wanting to be the one that solves the problems, and now all of a sudden you're supposed to kind of take a back seat and be the one who helps others solve problems, and it's a really hard thing to do. But I think the center of that is autonomy and accountability. Does that sound right? Have you faced some of those same struggles with people struggling with the delegation?
Oh, absolutely. Because you move from being an expert and doing the execution to still being an expert. That's part of
Yep.
the credibility that you bring in leading a group of experts. But you are now moving into more of the visionary versus the executor. And you're enabling your team of experts or whatever the combination might be to do great things. So they won't always do it exactly the way that you would have done it. So you have to set expectations, be very clear on the expectations. And the third step most people skip, Matt, is validate that they heard the expectations that you think you set. Because sometimes, more often than not, what they heard is not what you said.
Yes.
So I work with my clients in particular in setting up autonomy so that they understand, as a leader is trying to set expectations, and that leader gets a confirmation that the comprehension's been given. And it's not by simply saying, repeat back what I just told you so we're clear. It's
Yeah.
more getting curious about, how are you thinking about taking this forward? What does success look like?
Mm.
How, what are times that we should be meeting, what are some of the milestones coming up that we should be looking at, for, check-ins to make sure we're moving in the right direction, understanding how they're thinking. Because again, they're not going to do it, A through Z exactly the way you would,
Yep.
but you can create that autonomy and let them know, okay, you've got this. And it's autonomy also gets confused with abandonment. I just hand it over,
Yep.
it's done. And
Yep.
it's not about that. It's about enabling your team, being hands off, but being available. It's a form of stewardship and guiding, if you will, as a leader,
Mm-hmm.
versus that hands on dive in. And there will be moments, because you are the technical expert that's been now moved into leadership, where you know that something's going to happen that shouldn't. So you can either jump in and take it over, which is going to diminish everybody's belief in
Yep.
themselves and put you into a micromanaging role, and they're not going to trust you. Or you can get curious and talk about different options and how could this work. So how you stylistically show up and let go. And that let go is hard. It's
Yeah.
acknowledging it. It's a change for you as you've moved from expert to leader of experts. That is autonomy. And when you do all those things, Matt, it sets you up to hold them accountable because they're going to hold themselves accountable for the things they told you they were going to do.
Well, and I really like what you said earlier about, a lot of times when I think about setting expectations, it is still doing a lot of that pre-work, like this is when we're going to check in or this is how far we can go. But I love kind of the redirect that you have of like, do that, but as more of like a coaching conversation. You don't provide the answer, you let them provide you the answer, and then you can decide whether or not to kind of adjust it. It really reminds me actually of learning theory that I'm really trying hard to implement in the courses that we have, and that I always have to push back against subject matter experts on, because very often I'll create a course and learning theory says that it's actually good if you ask somebody a question before you've given them the answer, because and their brain has to like really think through it, and then they provide you something maybe completely off base, but that's still okay. It's still going to help them learn in the long run. And so when we're making courses for companies, very often I'll have those kind of like, pre-questions, and I'll get pushback from subject matter experts where they say, well, we haven't told them any of this yet, so we can't ask them. And I have to remind them, that's actually the point. We are still going to tell them. But it flowed really well with this, in that I think my first inclination, especially if I'm dealing with more junior folks, is to assume that they're not going to know the answer that first time. And so I'm going to tell them, but how do I know that unless I ask? So giving them that space to come up with these answers themselves. Well, I still have the ability to, like, actually, I'd prefer if we met every week instead of every 2 weeks. That's still an option if
Mhm.
you want to. But you might as well let them take the first step.
And it's a form of data for you. What I
Mm,
love, you and I create courses very similarly. I would ask questions at the beginning of the learning audience to get their perspectives. What's their beliefs
yeah,
around this?
yeah,
Is there any limiting beliefs that we're going to have to myth bust, if you will, going forward? And leaders can do that too in understanding, especially if you got a question like, I don't know if they're going to be able to handle this part. Ask them how they're going to handle it, but not in a way that is very inspection like. Get curious and go, what are your thoughts on how you're going to break this down, and what obstacles do you think you're going to see? You can teach in the moment still. You're not
yeah,
barred from it, but when you come out of the gate and this is how I think you should do it, and I want you to do A, B, and C. A, that's not autonomy. B, you can't scale, so you're creating more stress for yourself. If you're also limiting the possibility that maybe they have an idea that is different than yours that will actually be better than yours. And
yeah,
so innovation gets stifled. Also, you're creating more stress. And when we as humans are in stress, our brains cannot be creative. Our brains actually go in flight or fight and really don't want to move forward. And so
yeah,
you're actually being counterproductive in that moment.
yeah, yeah, 100%. I always think about that regarding, feedback and giving feedback, and our brains are really wired to latch on to feedback, assume that it's negative, assume that it's like threatening to our physical being, and just immediately go into that fight or flight response. And yeah, that's why it's the whole job of a manager is to figure out how to have these discussions without activating that response. That's the only way you can learn and move forward. So framing them in those ways makes a lot of sense. The one final question I have for you that I'd love to dive into is again around this idea of delegation. I think we touched on this the last time we chatted. Was the idea of when you're making that change, when you're creating these teams that are autonomous, and you can hold them accountable and you can do bigger things. It's a very different way of working. And how do engineers, how do technical people who have spent their life, getting fulfilled by solving problems, shift their mindset to being fulfilled by helping other people solve their problems?
Mm. Um, I would still look at it as a puzzle.
Okay.
It's a complex people puzzle. It's
Yeah.
not necessarily a piece of hardware to design. And when you can get curious about the different levers, what's really going on here? take a look for clues in the emotions going on. Are people feeling insecure? Are people feeling overly secure and maybe they're at risk of that? What's the dynamic going on in your team? And make a puzzle out of how do I get this to be the highest performing group of individuals that I can. Take those superpowers of your expertise. Stay data driven. I'm all about what are the facts. Don't make assumptions. Favorite book of mine is The Four Agreements. And one of them is don't take things, well, two of them, don't take things personally and don't make assumptions. So tech folks tend to be data driven. Use the data. And when there's missing data or gaps, get curious, ask questions, and do so in a way that's going to help you solve the puzzle of creating a very dynamic, high performing team. And I would argue understanding humans and how to move that forward is one of the biggest puzzles you can ever solve. So it should play right into strengths, if you will.
That that's exactly what I was thinking. As long as you can frame it that way in your mind, yeah, there's no greater puzzle to solve out there. So it's just intricate, infinitely complex, and can have infinite gains if when you figure out how to solve it for each individual person. So I couldn't agree with you more there. Andrea, I know you do a lot of work with executive teams. You do a lot of coaching. Who should be reaching out to you, and how should they reach out to you?
I do some one-on-one coaching on occasion. I open up those windows and I post that on LinkedIn. I'm primarily
Great.
these days meeting with teams and speaking on stages or at all hands to talk about how you can really be successful without burning out and being able to hold yourself to being authentic, accountable, and really creating that autonomy within your team. So you can reach out to me on LinkedIn or at a3culturelab.com. And on LinkedIn, I've had several podcast folks ask me to spell my name because when you're listening to this, so it's Andrea Wanerstrand. It's a Swedish name that I married, or clan name, and it's Wanerstrand. And I'm the only one there on LinkedIn, so you can find me there.
Fantastic. Well, we'll make sure to put a link in the description. So hopefully if they can just go there. Hopefully that'll make it easier. But yes, that's fantastic. So Andrea, this has been a great discussion. I think we dove into, some really balanced topics where it's like understanding how do you care? What does caring mean? How do you validate what people heard? How do you become a better coach as a manager? So this has been a fantastic discussion. I look forward to the next one, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Matt. I love being here. Thanks.
Thank you so much for listening to today's show. If you are looking for help turning your organization's great engineers into great managers, me and my team at Better Everyday Studios would love to help. We deliver targeted and interactive training workshops that are designed to help build the 3 fundamental skills of any new manager: building trust, giving feedback, and setting goals. Reach out to me through matt@bettereverydaystudios.com so we can start making your organization better every day.